Welcome everybody, Dr. Adam here. Today's instructional video is on how to store equipment over the winter. It's the end of the season. We've been harvesting honey and we've got a bunch of drawn supers that we've got to store properly to ensure that pests don't get into them, like wax moths, like mice, and that they're ready to go next season so that we can take advantage of all of that drawn wax that our bees worked on all season long. So let's show you some key tips to understand about how to store equipment properly over the season. So here's our mess of equipment from an entire season of beekeeping, equipment moving out of storage into the yard, being utilized all season, and now we're ready to move all of this back into storage. Now, the big things to keep in mind here is really there is one resource you are trying to protect in storing beekeeping equipment, and one resource only, and that is drawn wax. That is what we're concerned with. All the rest of your beekeeping equipment can be easily stored outdoors under some sort of a covering, whatever that looks like. It is perfectly fine. The woodenware, it is painted, it's protected. It can stay outside with some coverage. You can even leave it just out if you want to. It's just going to prematurely age. But really the only thing we're concerned about in storage process is drawn wax. And the reason is because it's worth its weight in gold, essentially, to beekeepers, because when you put that on next season, that is immediate storage capacity. They don't have to produce wax at all through the wax glands. They literally just manipulate what's on the frame, and you've got immediate storage. So it's really important to protect that. So you're not going to store drawn wax outside. Now, if you absolutely have to, you can. And what you would do in that type of a situation is you want to make sure that it's sealed up nice and tight so that no pests can get in. That is the big risks there. So you can store it outside if you absolutely have to. I would much prefer to store my equipment, that drawn comb, indoors if I'm going to be storing it. And that's a really important thing to understand. So storage-wise, here's a couple of tips just to get started with when you're thinking about storing wax. If you have any pest problems, say for example you have small hive beetle is a prime example of a pest that can really mess up some wax, that is something that can be in your colony going into winter. If you have had problems with small hive beetle, one way to eliminate that problem is to freeze your wax. And this only really works well if you're at a small scale, but you can take frames out of your colony, and if you see any sort of indication within that colony that you have small hive beetle still going on, adults floating around or anything like that, that means there could be eggs and larvae in there somewhere. Go ahead and freeze those frames. So that's a real easy way to kill a lot of our storage pests. Also works for wax moths as well. If you end up getting a wax moth infestation or some wax moth getting into your equipment, you can freeze them to kill them. But oftentimes the problem is that these are, like wax moths in particular, are storage pests. So typically you don't see that activity until the next year, and your comb is absolutely ruined with webbing and tunneling going all the way through the comb. So best thing to do, store your equipment indoors if you can. If you cannot, the key here is pretty simple, and I'm going to show you that here in just the next screen. But essentially what we need to do if we are going to store this in, say, a lean-to or something like that, where it's still accessible to pests, but it is covered so that things are protected. I'm going to show you exactly how to store your equipment right now if you're in that situation. So with those boxes of drawn wax, if you're storing these in some sort of an outdoor area where there's going to be sun exposure at some points, this is a great way to store equipment on its edge. Light penetrating through these frames is going to eliminate wax moths going in and laying eggs. It's also going to eliminate your rodent activity because this is a wide open cavity right here. Once this is closed up, you lay it down flat and you start stacking stuff on top of it. Real nice dark area to rear young for both invertebrates and vertebrates. So if you do have equipment you're going to be storing outdoors or somewhere where it's getting some light exposure, this is a great way to do it. And you could just line these up. Say you got 10 drawn supers that you're going to be storing this winter. Just line them up, all exposed to the sunlight, all exposed to light coming in, and no closed areas for those invertebrates and those vertebrate pests to really get a foothold in. Now, the other thing that you can do also, if you don't want to just store these in hive bodies, say you don't have a whole ton of these drawn wax frames, what you can also do is you can create a hanger system somewhere in a building. If these are open like this, you're not going to get storage pests, okay? That's generally the rule of thumb. And I'll also give you a couple key indicators here as other ways to do that as well. But you can essentially develop rafters. I've seen people actually purchase the racks that they use in bakeries and use those to store frames on. I've seen people make frame storage apparatus things that they've come up with themselves. You know, farmers are engineers all the time and always coming up with really cool solutions to things. But I've seen a lot of rafter racks that people have made where they, you know, put them basically up in the rafters or up on the ceiling of a garage or something like that, just hanging like this. So that's another way that you can store. Now, the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to storage of these, you can safely store wax frames without worry about things like wax moth, generally, if there is no pollen in these frames. Protein is what those wax moths are after. You know, the tunneling that happens afterwards with the frames and the webbing. That's all after after the adults are looking for protein to supplement that food source for their larvae. So really, what ends up happening when it comes to that is if you really are diligent about going through your frames, every single one of them, and making sure that there is no pollen in the frames that you are storing, that is going to largely eliminate your wax moth problem for the most part. Now it may not eliminate it entirely, but it is a great preventative measure to really dial down that pressure from wax moths if that is a big storage pest in your area. Now, the other thing to keep in mind with that protein source, if you do have those frames that have protein in them, keep in mind that these frames cost you like $2 a piece. If you've got to just throw it away, just throw it away. It's not worth saving a $2 frame that puts at risk all of this drawn comb because you got a little bit of protein in there that you want that those wax moths are going to take advantage of. So that's a great tip as well. So storing these on their side, storing them in rafters, on racks, things like that, are great solutions as well for storage of this equipment. So for those of you that need to explore outdoor storage, you know, not all of us have the space to store these things indoors. You can really store these outside pretty well. So these are stacked drawn supers that you see here. And what I've done, they're on a pallet. And what I've done is that pallet has number 8 hardware cloth stapled all to the bottom. And these sit right on top of that hardware cloth. What that means is that those vertebrate pests are not going to get through that bottom. So mice are not going to be an issue by putting hardware cloth down on there. Now, what you could also do in a stacked up setup like this is you could wrap this in shrink wrap or the plastic that they wrap pallets with on a roll. And that would eliminate areas for wax moths to get introduced. Now you can see, like, this is older equipment. So like right here, this hole is a prime entry point for pests. Right, so we want to make sure that that's covered. So we can use that cellophane wrap in order to do that. Now, the one thing you are going to want to make sure is that these are covered as well. So if you are storing them outside, put some sort of a cover on them. If I'm in a store outside, what I really like to use is pink insulation because it's lightweight, it's inexpensive, it's easy to cut to the right size, and it can sit on all 4 of these very easily with a couple big rocks or cinder blocks or something like that on top of it to keep the wind from blowing it off during the middle of the winter. But by setting it up like this and closing it up real nice and tight, you do eliminate most of your pest problems. And it's a great way to store equipment, like I said, if you don't have the space to put something like this inside. So a few other storage ideas just to think about. One of the best storage mechanisms that I've seen for beekeeping equipment, and something that we are definitely building towards to bring here on our farm, is a shipping container. Shipping containers make fantastic equipment storage places. They're very inexpensive, you know, usually around $3,000 to $4,000 for a 40-foot container. Really nice and tight usually, especially if they're newer containers. You're not going to get any pests coming in there. Great places to store equipment. So that's another really great place to store equipment. If you're storing it in your garage, you still have the opportunity for pests to come in. And although you can stack them like I showed you here, you can stack them one on top of another like I showed you here and close them up nice and tight so that nothing's able to get in. You may still get some storage pests. And if you have a lot of wax moth where you live, You can use chemical options as well, and Paramoth is a prime example. It's essentially mothballs for beekeeping equipment, and you can utilize that to eliminate a lot of those pest problems that you're having if they're excessive in your area. But if you don't have a lot of pest problems, like up here, wax moth really isn't a big problem for us up here. We do get it every once in a while, but it's very rare. And so we really, just by the tips that I showed you today, you know, storing things indoors, stacking them up, making sure they're tight and closed up, wrap them if you need to, if it's older equipment, those types of things really eliminate our pest problems for the most part. But if you're in an area where, you know, you have a really prevalent wax moth issue, you may need to take a little bit of a step further with something like Paramoth in order to really prevent those storage pests from affecting that drawn wax. And that, again, just to hammer that home, that is what this is all about. All of these empty supers that you see stacked here, these are not going anywhere. I store all of this equipment outside, and most of my equipment is very old, so I'm not really too concerned about it. But if your equipment's painted correctly and really is in a newer condition, you can store this stuff outside. Generally, you're going to want to cover it from sun exposure, but usually this stuff is just fine. It's just the drawn frames that you're really concerned about when it comes to storage. So pick kind of your best solution that works for you. It's all dependent on scale, right? You don't need a shipping container if you're only running 2 beehives, and you may be able to use one of the rafter options. Or if you have a little bit more of equipment, but not a ton, maybe you can use this option where you just kind of line it up in a pole barn or line it up in a lean-to and just leave it there over the season. Again, you know, if it's on its edge and you've got light coming through it, you're not going to have storage pest issues with that type of equipment. So there's a lot of different options here. It just depends on the scale that you're at. Now, commercial beekeepers, they have warehouses full of this stuff, big pole barns that are floor to ceiling with stacked equipment that's palletized, that's wrapped for storage. So you know, very different situation. But if you're a small scale beekeeper, these are really great solutions for storing your equipment over the winter and making sure that you're able to come out into the spring and take advantage of all that hard work the bees did the year before, drawing all that wax for you. Great way to maximize production in the next year. I hope you enjoyed this instructional video, and we'll see you at the next one.